2 weeks ago, on the fourth Sunday of Advent, Pastor Heath preached a beautiful sermon on the reality, the fact, the truth that we are here celebrating Christmas, that we are able to rejoice in the incarnation, that we are able to glory in the redemption of the world through Jesus Christ solely because Mary said yes. If you were here, I imagine you remember that story. Mary said yes. She said yes when the angel came to her and summoned her into this remarkable, shocking, stunning role of being the bearer of the Holy One of God. A role for which there was no precedent, no preparation. This poor, frightened teenage peasant girl being asked to take upon herself an identity and a role beyond comprehension. And she said yes. And because of her affirmation, because she said yes, the entire celebration that we've just enjoyed of Christmas, as well as the redemption of the world, was able to take place. And as a result, understandably and justifiably, Mary has taken a central position throughout our Christmas celebration for centuries. And for millions of Christians around the world, she is a focus of piety and of prayer and of faith because of her openness to God's call, because she said yes. But lost a little bit in the entire Christmas story, in the entire story of the Incarnation, is another figure whose role was, if not as important, certainly critical and foundational, and that is Joseph. We are also here, also able to celebrate on this 10th day of Christmas the incarnation of Jesus in human form, because Joseph also said yes. Joseph was, like Mary, placed in the challenging and confusing role of being summoned to a new vocation, a new identity, which was beyond anything he planned for, when the angel appeared to him and said, "The young woman to whom you are betrothed, to whom you are engaged, is carrying the Holy Child of God." How easy it would have been for Joseph either to have put her away quietly, which was his initial response, or to make a big fuss and a big stink, to shame her publicly. You can only imagine how now with, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, he probably would have done just that. I would be inclined to. But instead, being told by the angel that he has a role to play, and that he should embrace Mary and this child within her, Joseph also says yes. And he journeys with her to the town of Bethlehem, and there is present when she is born, is present as these wise men show up from the east bearing exotic, strange gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And then, as soon as they depart, Joseph receives a dream warning him that Herod the Great, a vicious, venal man, is about to put to death all infant boys who could possibly be rivals to Herod's kingship. Now again, how easy it would have been for Joseph, on receiving this dream, to imagine, like Ebenezer Scrooge, that it was simply a piece of undigested cheese or a spot of mustard. But instead, once again, Joseph says yes. And with nothing more to go on than a dream and faith, he takes Mary and the infant, and they flee as refugees, as exiles, into a distant, foreign, and strange land, like their ancestors centuries before them, taking refuge from the violence that is soon to befall Bethlehem and the region. And so we are here. We are here, able to celebrate Christmas, able to celebrate this 10th day of the season, able to rejoice in the redemption of the world through Jesus Christ, because Joseph also said yes. Now, if you're like me, the story today is kind of an abrupt interpolation into our Christmas joy and delight. We all know that this season lasts for 12 days. Even if the culture doesn't, even if the day after Christmas the sales begin and trees begin to appear on the curb and everyone goes back to life, we know that Christmas is 12 days. 12 days of celebrating the wonder, the mystery, the shock of the Incarnation. So it's even more shocking then as we get close to the end of this season, to have this story of violence and venality interjected into our Christmas reverie. But that makes sense, doesn't it? Because we all know that life, in fact, is a combination of the joyous and the sorrowful, of the celebratory and of the painful or the fearful. Think back even the day after Christmas, the feast of St. Stephen, the first martyr in the church. So we go from our white and gold of Christmas Day to wearing red on St. Stephen's Day, the very day after Christmas, because life is filled with this sort of admixture of the fearful and the joyous, of the painful and the delightful. And this story of Joseph taking the Holy Family into exile in Egypt to protect the newborn reflects the reality of our lives and our world, doesn't it? Everywhere where the light comes into the darkness can try too easily and too often to swallow it up. Think about that. Almost every time Jesus came into a situation bearing light and love and life, there were forces that rejected and rebelled against it. When he returned to his hometown and proclaimed that he was the fulfillment of the prophetic tradition of the Hebrew scriptures and prophets, his own hometown rejected him. When he healed on the Sabbath, the crowds rejected him. When he consorted with the prostitutes, the outcasts, the losers, the lepers, the religious leaders rejected him. Again and again, wherever he tries to bring light and life and hope, the darkness tries to enfold him. And that's what we see in the story today. The light of the world has come, as we have been reminded through these last 10 days. But the darkness of Herod, the darkness of fear, the darkness of anxiety and greed begins to try to enfold him. And it's only because Joseph said yes and took him to Egypt to protect him that we are here. Otherwise, the story would have just simply faded into an anecdote in history, if that. Of course, one of the wonderful things about this story is the way in which Matthew reminds us that Jesus is a second Moses and more than a second Moses. Moses was part of the people of Israel who had gone into exile in Egypt in order to get away from famine and terror. And Moses, as an infant, was hidden from a king who wanted to put him to death, just as Jesus is hidden from a king who wants to put him to death. Moses leads his people out of Israel to new life in the promised land, just so Jesus returns to his promise, to his homeland, the promised land, and leads his people, and indeed all people, to a new life and a new reality. Again and again, Matthew shows us the ways in which Jesus fulfills and even transcends the prophecies about the coming one of God. And to me, one of the most remarkable aspects of this Christmas story, of the full 12 days, not just the day, not just the joy, not just the gold and silver, not just the frankincense and myrrh, but the entire story is the way we are reminded that God is with us, not just in the joyful and the delightful, but also in the dark and the fearful. Yes, life sometimes is glorious and joyous. It's wonderful and filled with love. And God is with us there, celebrating with us, blessing us, relishing our delight. And sometimes life has darkness and fear and pain. And God is with us, maybe even preeminently with us during those moments, whether we realize or acknowledge it. Joseph said yes, Mary said yes, and our call is likewise to say yes. To yes to the belief that God is with us not just in the good times, but also, and again, preeminently in the bad. Yes to the call of God to be God's people and to live in faith. Yes to the vocations to which God summons us. Yes to reach out in God's love and grace and light. Yes to be beacons ourselves of light in the darkness that might be around and even sometimes within us. We We are here because Mary said yes. We are here because Joseph said yes, and we are called ourselves today to say yes. Yes to God. Toward the end of our first reading today from Jeremiah, there's a wonderful phrase tucked away. You may have missed it. I am not referring to the phrase where the prophet tells us that God has announced, I will give the priests their fill of fatness. We're not going there today. Instead, it's when the prophet says on God's behalf, I will turn their mourning into joy. Did you hear that? Did you catch that? I will turn their mourning into joy. He promises this to the people of Israel in exile, that when they are returned to their homeland after being in captivity in foreign lands, God will turn their mourning into joy. That's what the entire incarnation, this entire season, the entire story of God's presence among us as one of us is all about. Turning mourning into joy, turning darkness into light, turning fear into hope, turning sorrow into joy, turning death into life. Because Mary said yes. Because Joseph said yes. And do we have the faith, the courage, the hope, likewise, to say yes to